yourself a monster, giant, beast, Goliath, the rock, any king with this rock in my sling up. I've been hunting all day, boy. I've been hunting all day.
Hello, my name is Robbie. On here I'm Templar Knight. Every person who believes in God but does not attend a church has a story why. But it's said that whenever 2 or more people gather in God's name, that He is there. So this is church. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we continue with our Fearless series, the story of King David. Now, I'm pretty sure everyone remembers where we left off last week. Last week we talked about David the boy, the shepherd, the musician, at 12 years old, anointed to be the next king. Now we jump ahead. King Saul has led the armies to fight the Philistines. David's a teenager now, and he is sent to the battle site. And as David arrives, he finds his brothers, and he greets them. He brings them the care package his father sent with. And he looks across the way and he sees the Philistines. And he says, "Guys, why are we not fighting them? I thought we came here for war." And they look at him and they say, "They have a champion who wants to fight this in the old way. And for the last 40 days, he has come out and he has challenged us to send forth a champion. But no one will fight him." And David looks across the battlefield and he hears the war horn. And he sees their champion. He hears the taunt. "Is there no one who will battle me?" And David looks at his brothers. Why is no one going to fight him? We are the army of the Lord. And they look at them. That is Goliath, the giant from Gath. David is confused by this. It's been 40 days that Goliath has come forth and challenged them. And no one in God's army will face him. He doesn't understand. He looks at why won't anyone fight him? Like, kid, have you seen that guy over there? He's huge. David's like, yeah, but God is on our side. Why won't anyone fight him? And one of the soldiers looks and says, "Look, King Saul has promised anyone who fights him that they will become a general in his army. But still no one's going to fight this dude. King Saul promised that anyone who takes him down gets to marry his daughter. Still no one's going to fight this dude. King Saul has promised that whoever takes this guy down, their family will never have to pay taxes again. But still no one will fight him." And David's just baffled by this. Now mind you, David, he's like 16, 17 years old. He's still a kid. These are soldiers. These are men. And he does not get why they won't fight. And he looks at them and he's like, "He's insulting you. He's insulting your God. And no one will stand up to him? Come on, there's got to be someone here." Well, then Dave's brother chimes up and says, "Look, David, I appreciate you making this care package, this delivery for Dad, but I know why you're here. You just came here because you want to see a fight. Leave the battling to the men. Why don't you go back home, pick a fight with your bears and your imaginary lions?" Now, mind you, David's brothers, I don't think they've ever gotten over how unusual their little bro is. He's not a man like they are. And so David, he's kind of drawn back a bit. He looks down, he's just, okay. You know, brother, you're right. I didn't kill that bear. Or those lions. God did that. And God is going to kill this giant too. And it looks like he's going to use me to do it. And so David marches off from the front line. He goes marching towards Saul's tent. Now mind you, David knows Saul's tent. David's been summoned there plenty of times to play music to help the king sleep. He knows where to go. I don't quite know what those soldiers were thinking, having this kid call him out like that. I wonder if any of them were almost shamed enough to want to do the fight. But then you look across the way and there's Goliath. So they let David walk off to meet King Saul. And David goes in, he tells him, he's like, my king, I am here to fight this giant for you. Saul looks at him. You're just a boy. Now mind you, Saul was a warrior king. Saul was a decent sized guy. He's like 6'2", 6'4". He's masculine. He's solid. He knows how to fight. And now he has this little teenager walking into his tent saying, I'm your champion. I will fight for you. And David tells him the stories of the lions that God has slain and the sheep that he protected and the bear that he has killed. It's like, this is no different. Someone is threatening the flock. God will use me to protect it. Now Saul's moved by this. Mind you, David, he's a poet. He's a musician, a prodigy, unlike anyone they've ever known. Clearly he knows how to words good enough to inspire this man. And so Saul is moved. He's willing to support this child. And so he gives David his armor. He says, at least go fully clad in a king's armor. And they put it on David. They strap on the bronze plate. But it's all too heavy for David because, again, Saul was a big, strapping man. David's just a little kid. And he's like, I can't use this. This isn't going to work for me. I don't know how to fight this way. I will fight him in the way God has taught me. And so he goes and he grabs his staff. And he goes and he grabs 5 stones. And he approaches the front line. He pushes through. And across the way, there may be 100 yards between the Israelite army and the Philistine army. And there's Goliath standing out in front. And David steps out. And he starts walking towards Goliath. Goliath looks at him. What's this? What am I, a dog, that you would come at me with a stick? Come here, child, and I will give your flesh to the birds. David looks at him. He says, you come at me with a sword and your spear and your big shiny shield, but I come against you in the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. So God has chosen me to kill you. And then, and he fades out, and he lowers his head, and Goliath just laughs. Then what, you foolish child? And David looks back to the Israelites, and he sees his brother standing there in disbelief, and he smiles. And then I'm going to cut off your head. Goliath isn't having it. This little punk kid talking about cutting off his head with a stick. Goliath is furious, and he pushes away from his shield bearer, and he goes charging in. We're going to take a quick time out, because this is the first time that we get to see the site of David's military genius. Now, mind you, I've already told you this kid is a prodigy musician. He sings better than anyone around. But what we didn't know was his military tactics. And to understand what David just did, we have to understand Goliath. So who was Goliath? Goliath comes from Gath, which was the capital of Philistine. Now the Philistines, they were in the Iron Age. They were bigger, they were more powerful than Israel. Israel was still in the Bronze Age. Philistine actually had rules saying that they were never allowed to even make iron forges or do anything with iron, or the Philistine army would come and crush them. Now, I'm not sure how much you guys know about medieval warfare, but in a game of rock, paper, scissors, iron beats bronze every time. So they are all the Philistine army is already better equipped. Goliath, he's a soldier. He is between 30 and 40 years old. He is over twice the age of David. Not only is he that much older, he was born and raised to be a soldier, because Goliath's whole family were giant. And I don't just mean like giant in the way we think of. When I say giant, let's go with basketball players, because some of them are huge guys. You got Shaquille O'Neal, Yao Ming, you got some big, tall guys. But they only stand like, 7 foot and change? Goliath stood 9.5 feet tall. So if you can imagine these basketball players standing next to Goliath and having to look up at him. But now these basketball players, they're athletes, they're fit. But they're not soldiers. They do not engage in physical combat the way Goliath does. It's also important to point out, Goliath had brothers. Now, anyone who's grown up with brothers, you know that is that's different. Could you imagine the chaos these boys did? These giants, who in their childhood years were already standing 5-6 feet tall. All they know is combat. Workout, fighting, wrestling, weapons training. That's Goliath. That is why he leads the Philistine army. And it worked great for him, because back in those days, battles were fought. It was normally one-on-one combat. Each army would send out their best fighter to fight the other. Now, ironically, that's supposed to determine who won the battle, but rarely did it ever actually happen that way. I was very baffled to find that out, but normally it was more of a hype show. Our best versus your best. If our guy wins, it's a huge morale boost. But most of the armies, when they were their champ was defeated, they would either surrender or they would still fight. But it wasn't always that the champions determined the battle. But this is what Goliath was raised for. There's a reason the Philistine army was one of the dominant forces in the land at his time. There was even some debate as to whether Goliath and his family come from the Nephilim, which, that's just theory, because it was said the majority of the Nephilim were wiped out in the flood. But there's some standing qualities. So now we go back up to our current time. Who is Goliath right now? Well, first off, 9'6", 300 to 400 pounds of pure muscle. Dude's got a spear with a 25-pound spearhead on it. He's got a massive sword, probably bigger than David himself. And he's got a shield that is so big it requires a shield bearer just to carry this thing. Now, mind you, a normal person carrying this shield stands almost 6.5 feet tall. And Goliath has armor. Now, armor back in those days, they had the greaves. They had stuff covering their shins. They had the chainmail plating. They had covers over their arms. Oftentimes they'd wear a thick wool tunic over it. And he's got this shield. And he's got his helmet. And he's trained to fight with it. Now, if there's one thing you're seeing here, if your feet and your shins are protected, and your arms and your head are protected, and you've got this shield you can hide behind, Goliath is a wall. And David can see that. Now, I don't know if you guys are seeing what I see, but I wonder about David. For the last 4 to 6 years, he's known that he will one day be king. Now, as a little boy, the age of 12, being told you're going to be king, but not now, so go and tend to your sheep, I wonder what was going through his head every day. You think maybe he was using his imagination? Because knowing you're going to grow up to be a farmer and knowing you're going to grow up to be a king might direct your thoughts a little bit. So I'm just wondering how much of David's skill, his leadership, if that was just instinct or if it was something he's mentally been training for, and how much of it is a gift from God. So now it's time to see if you guys picked up on his brilliance. What just happened in this fight? David steps forth, no armor, just his staff and his sling, sees this metal wall standing across the battlefield, and he taunts him. He gets him so angry that Goliath completely forgets everything he knows about being a soldier. And what does he do? He pushes away from his shield bearer and charges. Goliath is about to learn one of the most obvious lessons we know when it comes to fighting. Ranged weapons win. We have the phrase, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Goliath has a sword and a spear, but David has his sling. Goliath now has the ability to deal death within 15 feet of himself. David has the ability to deal death at 100 yards. And so he does just that. Goliath is now unprotected, charging like a maniac. And David runs out, finds where he needs to be, reaches in, grabs a stone from his sling, puts it in. Vroom, vroom, vroom. And before Goliath can even realize his folly, the stone strikes him right between the eyes, breaking through his skull and crushing his brain. And so Goliath sways, and he falls. 9.5 feet, 300, 400-pound man crumbles to the ground before this shepherd boy. All because he left his shield. With his shield, he could have blocked those stones. David wouldn't have stood a chance. But David knew how to draw his enemy out. And with Goliath laying there in front of him, he walks up. He takes the sword out of Goliath's sheath, takes off his head with it, holds the head up, looks back to the Israelites. Let's get him! Now, mind you, Philistine has the bigger and better army here. But the Israelite army has just seen something they couldn't have ever imagined. This little boy just dropped the leader of the Philistines. And now he is calling for a charge. How do you not support such a child? So they charge. The Israelites come stomping across the field. And the Philistines are in shock. This was supposed to be an easy victory. Yesterday, we had this fight in the bag. And now they're charging us? They break and they run. And the Israelites pursue. If there's one thing anyone who knows anything about medieval combat will tell you, is that once the army breaks, they are lost. More people will die in battle running away than fighting. And the Israelites did not disappoint. They pursued the Philistine army almost to the gates of Gath. The entire way, chasing them down and killing the stragglers. Once they approached Gath, they realized we've gone far enough. And they turn back. They come back to the battlefield. They loot the Philistine camps. Can you imagine what it was like to see the Israelite army coming back, being led by this teenage boy, not even in armor, carrying the head of Goliath? Quickly, the stories start to spread. Again, David, a prodigy, a natural-born leader, an amazing musician, a phenomenal singer, has just slain the leader of the Philistine army, has just led the Israelites. Can't even call it a battle. He just led them in a slaughter. They're carrying this kid back on their shoulders, cheering. Stories start to spread. Saul is a great warrior king, and he has killed thousands. But David has killed his tens of thousands. Now, if there's one thing we've learned about Saul, Saul is fighting his inner demons. Saul is no longer in God's favor. And Saul is a troubled and irritable man. He is the king. This is his army. And yet everyone is cheering this little shepherd boy who just showed up and in one day routed and destroyed the Philistine army. So now Saul's got this problem. He sits there on his throne. Well, let's face it, this was the Bronze Age. It probably wasn't quite a throne. He sits there in his chair at his camp, looking down over his army as they cheer this boy. And you know what he's thinking. Is this the man that God has chosen to replace me? The man who will be a better king than I am? I just promised him my daughter. That will make him my son-in-law. Did I just give him a way to the throne? And the more he thinks, the more angry, the more frustrated, the more fearful he becomes. What was set in motion this day? This boy thinks he can take my throne? We shall see. We shall see.
You can call yourself a monster, giant, beast, Goliath, a rock in